Who is the greatest of all time? That's a common question with plenty of debate in many sports, but what about cubing? Well, the answer is probably unanimous. However, cubing has 16 different events, with each having their own unique features, whether it's one-handed, square one, or semi-7. So instead of finding the greatest cuber of all time, which is obvious, who are the greatest cubers of all time in each WCA event? Now the question becomes a bit more interesting, and I can see how there could be arguments between many different cubers for different events. But I don't want to go off opinions. Instead, I want to find the greatest cubers off of only facts and statistics from the WCA. So that's exactly what I did. First off, I need to find qualifications for the greatest ever cubers. Obviously, world records would be on top of that list. In order to even be considered for the greatest of all time in an event, I believe you absolutely need one of these. So obviously, number of world records is important, but what else about them? First off, I think the duration the world record stands for should definitely be a huge factor. If a single world record stood for multiple years, that clearly shows dominance in an event, and it should be weighed much more than 2 world records lasting a couple of weeks each. Also, single WRs have to be weighed a lot less. Single is very luck based, and for many events, depends solely on getting a very easy scramble. On the other hand, average is a very skill based determinant for who is the greatest. For example, the greatest 2x3 solver right now is more likely to be Timon than Yu Shengdu. Making singles weigh less would also make sure that single WRs that stood for a while won't rack up too many points on just a lucky scramble. Finally, this one might be a bit controversial, but I also believe more points should be given for the world records that happened more recently. My reasoning for this is quite simple. With more competition and lower times, it's much more difficult to get a record now than in the past, despite all the better hardware and resources. This doesn't quite mean that older cubers can't be the greatest of all time, because they can. But if there are 2 cubers with very similar accomplishments, I would have to give the edge to the more recent one. So these are actually the only qualifications I will be using. There was another metric I considered though. World Championships and other championships I think are also a great way to show how great cubers are. However, things get a bit complicated. Not all cubers can attend these competitions halfway around the world. And if they don't, should they be punished for it? And if someone does poorly at that championship, do they lose points? Also, national and continental championships always vary in difficulty, with certain regions being more difficult to win in than others. In addition, with COVID, there's too many big competitions that were cancelled, so that would hurt the points of the more recent cubing talent that would have podiumed in those competitions. With all this in mind, I decided not to use this metric, and just solely focus on WRs. Alright, so now that we have a pretty good point system, who are the greatest cubers of all time? Let's look at 2x2 first. In this chart, it's very clear to see that Zain Kanani is the best of all time for 2x2. And this makes quite a lot of sense. He has the last 5 world records in a row, with the current WR average being 1.02 by him. And if you look at the 2x2 rankings right now, they're also dominated by averages by him. It's only until you get to the 22nd place until you see Martin Egdahl, and then it goes back to Zain again. Second and third on this list is Lucas Eder and Rami Spahi. I think that makes quite a lot of sense. These are both the 2x2 solvers that were dominating when I was starting cubing, with Lucas Eder having 3 WRs and Rami Spahi having 5 WRs, including the former single. There are some names here that aren't too familiar. For example, Lukasz is 4th, and he seems to be a pretty older cuber with 4 WRs. Also, interestingly enough, 10th place Gunnar has actually 5 WRs. Yeah, he's in 10th place. And this is because he got the first few WRs for 2x2, so I think it makes sense that even though he has 5 WRs, he's not as high on this list. Looking at 3x3, it's pretty obvious. The greatest cuber of all time is Felix Zemdegs with over 10,000 points, which is pretty crazy. This makes complete sense. He has 23 WRs in this event, and the next highest is actually 7, which is 3rd place. What's pretty interesting here is 2nd place is actually Min Tai, who only has 1 WR, and that's from the first competition ever held with the Rubik's Cube, back in 1982. So this does show some flaws in my ranking system. However, I think it kind of makes sense. If someone holds a WR for over 20 years, they definitely should be considered to be the greatest of all time, even if they only have 1 WR, and it was a single. So it kind of makes sense, but obviously, with no competitions happening in between then, his name probably won't be on anyone else's list. Also on the list are Max Park and Timon Kolczynski at 4th and 6th. However, they have huge shoes to fill to really even catch up to Felix, and it probably won't be ever done. I wasn't sure what the 4x4 list would look like, but here it is. Actually on top is Sebastian Weyer with 6,500 points. And you can see it's pretty close between him, Max, and Felix. Something interesting here is even though Sebastian has only 18 WRs and Felix has 19, Felix is actually 3rd and Sebastian is 1st, while Max Park is 2nd with 13 WRs. I think the reason why Sebastian dominates in this category is just because he had a long stretch of WRs, which were mostly average, from 2012 all the way to 2018, which is a long period of time. However, Max Park isn't that far behind, and I expect with a few WRs, he should be able to overtake Sebastian. 5x5 is also not even close. Felix here in this category has over 12,000 points, and Max Park, who is second place, is not even halfway there. In 5x5, Felix has a ridiculous 37 WRs, and it's very clear that he dominated this event. If you look at the records from 2010 all the way to like 2017, if you saw a 5x5 record, it had to be him. So it's quite crazy how many WRs he farmed in this time. The 6x6 list is actually quite shorter. There are only 7 people who held WRs in this event, and on top is actually going to be Max Park with 6,500 points. The top 3 here are also relatively close. Max Park had 16 WRs, Kevin Hayes had 15, and Felix had 14. Something interesting is that if Max Park didn't break all the 6x6 world records recently, with the sub 1 single and the sub 110 average, Kevin Hayes would actually be on top here. But with that legendary weekend, Max Park has jumped from 2nd to 1st, and now leads by a comfortable margin. For 7x7, I wasn't sure who it would go to, but it would also be Felix Zemdex. He's on top of here with almost 6,000 points, while Max Park trails by a little bit with 5,000 points. I think the main reason why Max hasn't gotten there yet is because he hasn't broken the WR in a while, with the 7x7 WRs being from 2019 and 2020. However, if he can get a few more going, I think getting first is very reasonable for him. Which is crazy to see Max Park just dominating almost all the big cubes. But not quite 5x5. That one might take a while actually. 3x3 blindfolded was another event where I had no idea who would be on top, and it actually turns out to be Kaijun Lin by a decent margin. He has almost 4,000 points, whereas Max, who is second place, has around 2,000 points. Looking at the WR count, it makes sense. He has 11 WRs while Max has 7. And there are a few others here that have 7. Leian Lo has 7, and Haiyan Zhang. I was wondering why Haiyan was at that position even though he had 7 WRs and dominated for I think a decent amount of time from what I remember. And the main reason is that he just didn't dominate averages for 3x3 blindfolded. But Kaijun Lin, because he dominated the averages for this event, has been shown in first place. But we'll see what happens. We see Tommy Cherry dominating recently, and he's there in 8th place, and I expect him to get quite higher. At 4 blind, it's also no surprise it's going to be Stanley Chappell. He has 12 WRs in this event, which is the most by far, with Kaijun having 8 WRs. Oliver Frost is in 3rd, who was a familiar name back then, had 6 WRs, which seems like a lot, but it's half of what Stanley has accomplished in this event. Also interesting note, Felix Zemdex is actually on this list. He did break the WR at some point, and he's right at the bottom there at 11. For 5 blind, surprise surprise, it's going to be Stanley Chappell on top again. This time he has 10 WRs in 5 blind. And very similarly, we see Kaijun Lin at 2nd place. He has 8 WRs, which is only 2 behind. So just like in big cubes, in big blind, the top few seem to be pretty similar. 3x3 multi-blind is going to be obviously Marcin. For those who don't know, he got the famous 41 out of 41 back in 2013, and it lasted for 5 whole years. He pretty much quit cubing and no one could beat it until 5 years later, Mark Bojanowski, he got a 43 out of 44. However, Graham Siggins at 2nd place has been doing pretty good at this event as well. He's had the record for around 3 years now. So we'll see if he can catch up with Marcin's legacy. And with a few WRs, I think it is possible. At FMC, it's also going to be a pretty clear choice. It's going to be Sebastian Aru, with 2nd place being Sebastiano Toronto with 3 WRs. Other than that, I don't know too much about FMC. 3rd is Kelshun, who holds the current WR for average. But yeah, that's the rankings for this event. It definitely is quite crazy that Sebastian had WRs from 2012 all the way to 2017. And someone with a pretty similar name, Sebastiano, has a current WR single and a former WR average. With OH, I didn't really know what to expect. I knew Felix and Max might be up there, and they are 1st and 2nd, with Max being 1st place. Even though he has 1 record less than Felix, he actually has a lot more points than him, at almost 5,000 points. And I think that's because Max Park actually dominated this event for quite a bit of time. He has a WR from 2016, and 1 also from this year, so that's quite a long period of time, with just 2 interruptions from Kian and Felix. However, for Felix, he actually didn't dominate this event as much as I thought he did. He was dealing with some tough competition from Mikau and Antoine Canton, who also ranked pretty high on this list. A name I wasn't too familiar with was actually Ryan Patricio, who's in 3rd here with 10 WRs, which is the highest on this list. He seemed to do pretty well in this event from 2005 to 2008, and his many WRs explain why he's so high on this list. However, with everything occurring so long ago, I think that's why he wasn't quite 1st or 2nd to challenge Max or Felix. For clock, I thought this was pretty obvious too. The greatest clock solver of all time is Yun Hao Lu with 4,000 points, and 2nd is Evan with almost 3,000 points. Yun Hao Lu has 8 WRs, while 2nd and 3rd, Evan and Stefan, have 6 each. And Yun Hao has been dominating this event for quite a bit recently. He held a single WR, and he has held that since 2021. And he has a ton of average WRs back to back to back from 2018 to 2020. And it took 2 whole years for the world to even catch up, with Caleb Chelford breaking his record and having the current record, beating him by only 0.05. And with COVID, China hasn't been able to compete much recently, so he hasn't gotten a chance to defend his record. However, if he did, I think there's a pretty good chance he gets the record back and show even more dominance on this list. Megaminx makes sense here too. On top is Juan Pablo Honqui with 15 WRs. He has 5,500 points, which is quite a long way ahead of Yu Da Han. Those two are what I thought would be first and second, but actually Eric Akicek at third place has 9 WRs, which is more than Yu Da Han's 7. I don't think there's an argument that Juan Pablo Honqui isn't the best Megaminx solver in the world. If you look at recent rankings, it's him pretty much everywhere, and only recently has someone beaten his average WR, with the first ever sub 30 from Leandro Martin Lopez. For Pyraminx, I expected Drew Brad to be on the top of the list, and by a pretty big margin. But actually no, he's actually second. First on the list is Yohei Oka. He's on top of 3,700 points, with Drew Brads being a tiny bit behind at 3,600. And Timon with almost 3,200 points can climb to second or first in this category. And also is actually not that far behind him. So the reason why Yohei is on top of this list is, I think, because he has the most WRs at 9. And he's dominating this event for a while, from 2008 all the way to 2011. Another interesting thing about him is I think he invented the Oka method for Pyraminx, which isn't quite popular now, but I think it is something interesting to note. Drew Brads also had a pretty long time period of being the best for Pyraminx, but his time was cut short by Timon, who actually broke the Pyraminx record back in 2017, which felt like such a long time ago, but he did. Timon held the WR average from then to 2021 until it was beaten this year. For Skewb, I was fully expecting a podium that was full of Polish people, and I was right. At first is Jonathan Klosko, 3,500 points and 9 WRs. Lukasz is close at second place with 4 WRs, and Mikau at 5 WRs in third. And fourth is the current WR holder for single and average, Zain Kanani. He had 3 WRs in this event and is actually half of the points of third here, which is pretty crazy. I definitely do think Zain has potential to get up there. However, with him coming out pretty recently, I think he needs a lot more time before he beats the legacy of the Polish Skewbers on top. From the time Skewb entered into a WCA event in 2014, all the way to 2021 actually, after COVID. The records are just full of Polish people. Also interesting, at 7th is Andrew Huang, and with his U-Perm scramble, he was able to get pretty high on this list because that record lasted for quite a long time. So before I get to the final event of this video, which is Square 1, my favorite event, here are 3 more tables. W3 with Feet, Magic, and Master Magic. On the WCA page for WRs, you can find these ones, so since I have the stats for them, I decided why not show them. Alright, and for the final event, Square 1, this one was the one I was most interested in, but I was pretty sure I knew who was on top, and I was right. On top is Bing Liang Li at 4,700 points. Now for a lot of people that don't know Square 1 history too much, he's been dominating Square 1 for a long time. From 2010 to 2016, he's held the Square 1 WR average, and no one was even close to challenging him. Even though it seems like he quit Square 1 in 2014, it took 2 years and a new Square 1 to come out that was really good, the G Square 1, until Brennan Lin finally broke this record average. Brennan Lin is also pretty high on this list, in 3rd place with 2,000 points. He has half the WRs of Bing Liang Li, as he had 4 WRs when Bing Liang Li had 8. Interestingly enough, 2nd place is actually Lars Vandenberg. He's known for the Vandenberg method, which is what everyone pretty much uses for Square 1, or some variation of it. He has around 2,800 points, and also he has the most WRs on this list with 9. Looking at the records, he seems to be really good at this event from 2004, where he broke the first ever single and average record, all the way to 2007. So even though these records were quite a long time ago, the amount of records he had in this event made him the 2nd best Square 1 solver ever. Though I agree with that, I'm not quite sure. I probably would put Brennan above him, but I can't see an argument being made for Lars, and from the algorithm I made, it seems like he is 2nd place, and by a decent margin. So I recognize a lot of these other names. Vincenzo is at 3rd. He got the record before COVID, which explains why he got a lot of points, as a lot of time passed with no one breaking his record. Rasmus is pretty high on this list with 4 records, but beating him by just an edge is Gregors Prusek. He actually had 5 WRs in this event, and this was also a name I never really heard of. He seemed to be pretty good at this event from 2007 to 2008. Also, an interesting thing is that this list is quite long, and is actually the longest list out of all the events, with a lot of unique record holders. So yeah, that's pretty much it. 16 events, and some of the greatest cubers of all time. I can see a lot of debate on whether this list is good or bad, so feel free to leave a comment below. Again, while there was some bias with the numbers from me, what cubers my algorithm chose was not biased. And there was actually a lot of lists that I didn't really expect. I definitely didn't see Mintai being second best overall for 283, or Lars Vandenberg being second best overall for Square 1. However, I think these lists brought a lot of insight to a lot of cubers I didn't know about. That did leave quite a legacy in the WCA. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this style of video, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Thanks for watching.